What's up, everybody? It's Travis here from Travis.media. Today I want to show you how to develop AWS Lambda functions locally in VS Code. This means creating, building, updating, testing locally. Everything can be done from your local dev environment. You should never ever be coding in that cold, gray, lifeless AWS console, that Lambda console. You should always do it in VS Code or whatever your code editor is. There was a time where I did that, but I've since learned about a great AWS application called SAM. Yes, SAM. What is SAM? Well, I'll give you AWS's definition. The AWS Serverless Application Model, SAM, is an open source framework for building serverless applications. It provides shorthand syntax to express functions, APIs, database, and event source mappings. With just a few lines per resource, you can define the application you want and model it using YAML. During deployment, SAM transforms and expands the SAM syntax into AWS CloudFormation syntax, enabling you to build serverless applications faster. So what does that mean? Well, Lambda functions, API Gateway, DynamoDB, these are all serverless. And what that means plainly is that there's no servers to manage with these services. In addition, there is a SAM CLI. And in our case, that's going to help us create, build, deploy, test Lambda functions locally. But that CLI has a bunch of commands that you can use with serverless services. In addition, SAM transforms and expands the SAM syntax into CloudFormation syntax. So in our project, we're actually going to define the resources, like the Lambda function, the API gateway, whatever. We're going to define those. So when we deploy it, it's going to either deploy them or it's going to update them. And that happens in CloudFormation. So it's an entire framework for building serverless applications. And you're going to see all that here in a minute. I'm going to make it really simple for you, and you're going to love it. So all we're going to do today is we're going to create a Lambda function locally, and I'm going to show you how to build its dependencies, deploy it, update it, as well as test it locally. So you can do everything with your Lambda function locally, and like I said, not have to use that console. So let's get started. Okay, so step one, let's install the AWS SAM CLI. So go to Google, type that in, and you'll get this search result. Click on it, and it'll give you instructions on how to install the AWS SAM CLI on Linux, macOS, and Windows. So pick your operating system, install that first. Second, you need Docker running. So the easiest way to do that, if you don't have it already, is to just download Docker Desktop. It's for Mac, Windows, and Linux. So type that in Google, and you get the search result. Click on it, download Docker Desktop, and make sure that's running. And the third prerequisite is that you authenticate to AWS. Now, if you have the AWS CLI, it's as simple as just typing AWS configure, and then put in your access key, which if it's already there, just confirm it. Your access key, your secret access key, your region, and your output format. And that's going to copy that into your credentials file, and you're going to be good to work with AWS. If you don't have these values, you can get them in the console. I'll put a link below on how to do it. If you don't have the CLI, you basically just open up your credentials file and put it in manually. I have MFA on my AWS account, so I have to do it a little different. I have to generate a token. So I have a script that I use for that. So I'm going to run that real quick. And if you also have MFA and you need to do this, I put that script in my GitHub repo in the gists section. Just look for CLI automation or something like that. And all you do is run it and enter in your 6-digit token, which I'm using Authy for, but you might have Authenticator or something like that on your phone. And that's all the prerequisites. So let's clear this and create a new project. So cd desktop, make directory. I'm going to call it SAM project. You can call that folder whatever you want. I'm going to cd into it. Now the SAM CLI has a lot of commands you can run. So if you type in SAM H, you'll see all the commands. The one we're going to start with is SAM init. So that kind of gives us a quick start template for a project to get started quicker than doing it from scratch. So there's SAM init, there's build, there's deploy, there's delete, there's package. Lots of stuff. We're going to be looking at all of these in this video. So let's type SAM init to create a new project. Which template source would you like to use? We're going to choose number 1, the quick start templates. What package type would you like to use? We're going to choose zip because we're not really uploading an image to ECR. And by the way, we have to use Docker, or SAM uses Docker containers to simulate the AWS Lambda runtime in your local environment. That's why we need Docker. I didn't mention that earlier. So yeah, let's choose zip here. Which runtime would you like to use? I'm going to use Python. And project name, I'll leave it at that. And it's going to clone the quick start template from GitHub. So this takes a second. Next, we have to choose a template. Let's choose the Hello World example because it's the most basic and something we can start with. Choose that. And our application has been generated. So if we ls, there's the SAM app folder, which is the name of our project. CD into that and code dot to open it in VS Code. So let me explain real quick the project structure. So let's first delete this tests folder because we don't need it. We're not going to get into that in this video. And I think that's good. So let's start with template.yaml. So what's cool about SAM is that it actually deploys and maintains all of your resources. It's very, very similar to CloudFormation. And in fact, it uses CloudFormation to deploy your resources and to create change sets to update your resources. So this may look really familiar to you. We're going to delete most of it to keep this simple because all we need is a Lambda function. This template actually creates an API gateway as well and puts in some outputs. So let's start at the top here. So the AWS template format version, this lays out the capabilities of the template, and actually there's only one, and it's this date, so you'll only use this. So keep that the same. Transform is what version of SAM you're using, so keep that the same. Description, you can put a description here. We're going to delete it. Globals, you can define globals. Let's delete that. And by the way, if you go to the documentation and you go to AWS SAM specification, you can look at all this stuff. So go to template anatomy, and it's going to give you the outline and all the parameters and everything. So the only required section is the resources section, which we're going to keep. The rest of this, like outputs, conditions, all of that can be added, parameters. But you can take a look here. It's really helpful. But like I said, we're just going to be sticking to resources. So let me come back here. So if you look at resources, there's one resource called Hello World function. It is of type AWS Serverless function. That tells us it's a Lambda function. There can also be API, or I think it's a simple table for DynamoDB. But anyway, we're going to stick to function because this is our Lambda function. So the resource is named Hello World function. It's of this type, and it has properties. It has a code URI, the handler, and the runtime, all of which you're familiar with. And right below that is events. So this defines our API gateway. See right here, it's called Hello World. But we're actually going to get rid of that because we don't need an API gateway for this. And outputs, it's outputting the API gateway URL, the Lambda function ARN, and the role ARN. So we don't need that either. It's really helpful, but we don't really need it. And when you deploy that, it's going to output that stuff for you. It's kind of helpful for you to have that information. But we're going to stick to just the Lambda function. And we're going to save this. Keep going up. We have a README, get ignore, and a init, nothing in that. And then we have our actual Lambda function. So here we have an app.py. And all it's doing is returning the status code of 200 and a body with a message of hello world. The rest of this is just comments, and my linter is going crazy. Select linter, so let me disable that. Go back to the terminal. So like I said, most of this is documentation. Here's some commented out stuff. Returns, parameters. Yeah, let's just delete all this. Keep it simple. So we have a Lambda function that just returns that. Import requests. We don't need that either. And we're going to save it. Requirements is just your normal Python requirements file saying, hey, requests is a dependency. We'll just leave that. And finally, there's events. So we can send test events to our function to test it locally. And I'll show you this in just a minute. So if we have our function open, we made some changes. We always want to rebuild it. And to do that, you just type in SAM build. And this creates like a build folder of our latest Lambda function, basically. So you'll see up here we have a .aws-sam folder and a build folder within that. And our Lambda function, this hello world function, and see it has all of the requests dependencies. So we could actually just right click, open it and zip it up and upload it in Lambda. It's everything you need, all of your dependencies in one folder. And then we have the template.yaml updated. So if I were to come down here and change something, let's change the name, like hello world. Let's just change this to hello function. If I were to change that and rebuild, I should see the build folder. I should see the contents in the build folder change to match that. So click on build, and it says hello function instead of hello world function. So I'm going to come back down here, change that back, rebuild it. So every time you make a change or you're finished making changes, be sure to rebuild it. Now let's say this is the first iteration and we want to deploy these resources. It's as simple as, and you see it right here in the commands, to deploy, SAM deploy guided. Guided kind of walks us through the first process of deploying it. So let's type that in, SAM deploy guided, and let's get this up in AWS. Stack name, you can name it whatever. I'm going to leave it SAM app, AWS region, US East 1. Confirm changes before deploy. This basically says, hey, before we deploy it, we're going to give you a chance to confirm it. We're going to show you all the changes down here, and you're going to confirm it. That's all. So choose yes. Allow SAM CLI IAM role creation, yes. Save arguments to configuration file. We want to do that so that when we update it, we already have this configuration saved for us. That's going to create a file over here, a configuration file. So choose yes for that. The SAM configuration file name, we're going to leave it at samconfig.toml. SAM configuration environment, just leave it default. And that's going to deploy our resources. So let me jump here in AWS. Now if we go to CloudFormation, we should see two stacks. If this is the first time you've deployed with SAM, you'll see two stacks. Now the first stack is the SAM CLI managed default. And what this is, it creates an S3 bucket to store your artifacts. So this is a one-time thing. Once you do this the first time you use SAM, then the subsequent deployments, your artifacts will just be added to this. The other stack, named SAM app, is your resources. This is what we're deploying. So it's a status of review in progress. So let's go back to our project and see that it's waiting for me to confirm it. So you see here, we're going to add a IAM role and a Lambda function, these logical resource IDs. This is what we're adding. Choose yes to confirm it, and it should deploy the Lambda function in the role. If we're doing an API gateway or whatever else, serverless, we would see it deploying as well. So now we come back here, refresh, it should be create in progress. And this is what's neat. As you update your Lambda function locally and build it and deploy it, it's going to create change sets and just update the parts and only the parts that you've changed. So successfully created and updated the stack. And if we go to Lambda functions, we should see that function. Let me refresh. There it is, SAM app hello world function. Great. So that's how you deploy a Lambda function or anything serverless with SAM. Yeah, so here's our Lambda function here. It's got all of our dependencies that requests brings along with it. We got our app.py, our requirements.txt. Great. So next, how do we manage our Lambda function locally? So we've learned how to create one, how to build it, how to deploy it. How do we test it? How do we update it? So first, let's look at testing. So go back to your Lambda function. Be sure you're not working in the build folder. Go back to your Lambda function, your app.py, and let's add some stuff to this. Let's imagine there's an event coming in. We're going to put first name equals event first name. So there's some event JSON coming in, and we're just going to capture the values and put them in variables. Last name equals event last name. I can't type. Event last name, and then let's say there's a message. And then down here for body, let's just put this. The message is, let's do an F string, message, first name, last name. So all we're going to say, we're going to send a message like hello, and then first name, last name. So how do we test this locally? Well, there's a folder here called events with an event.json file in it. And this was created with our template. It's got a ton of information. So it's got body, resource path. It's got a lot of stuff in relation to the API gateway that it created. But let's just delete this and create a simple one. Let's add our values, first name. Let's put Travis. Last name. Let's put media and message. Good morning. Now imagine this is an event coming from somewhere. So whatever our event is, we just need to grab the JSON that generates and pop it in here. And then we can test it locally. So go back to my app py. I think this is good. So the first thing we want to do is build it to have an updated Lambda function. And right here, you'll see it. Invoke the function with SAM local invoke. Let's try that out. SAM local invoke. We call this hello world function. And we're going to pass this E parameter. You probably see it in my auto suggestions, but we're going to pass this E parameter and put the path to our events JSON. So if you look at our folder, it says events, and the file is event.json. And that's how we pass in this event data to the Lambda function. So let's run this. And look at this, mounting this function as delegated inside runtime containers using Docker here to simulate that Lambda runtime. In the result down here, we get a status code 200 and a body with a message of good morning, Travis Media. And that's how we test it. Very simple. Just SAM local invoke. Now let's say we're satisfied with this and we want to update the Lambda function in AWS. We don't need to do SAM deploy guided again because we have this SAM config TOML file, which says, hey, here's the stack name, here's the S3 bucket, here's the region, confirm change set capabilities. Really cool. You can also put in deployment parameters and build parameters or configurations. Really neat. But we're just going to do SAM deploy. Hey, we already have a configuration. Let's just update it. So SAM deploy. And it's actually in AWS going to create a change set. Let's actually watch this for a minute. So it's uploading, initializing deployment, waiting for change set to be created. Deploy this change set. Well, what's the difference? Well, it's going to modify the hello world function, the AWS Lambda function, replacement false. So it's not going to replace it. It's just going to update some information. Deploy this change set, yes. And we should see here in CloudFormation the change set created. Let's go to SAM app, go to change sets, and see right here it's an update in progress. So it's actually still running. Successfully created. And if I refresh, I should see the last executed change set was, 1 minute ago, 15:55. And that's it. That's your workflow for developing Lambda functions locally in VS Code. So just to recap, you're going to create the function, you're going to define the resources, and then you're going to open up your Lambda function and you're going to develop. When you're happy with your changes, you're going to build it, you're going to deploy it. If you need to test it locally, just create an events JSON with your event data and invoke it locally. So test it, build it, and when you're ready, deploy it. Very simple. Now, if you want to delete your stack, you can't do it from the SAM CLI. The SAM CLI is just a wrapper around the AWS CLI anyway. I forgot the command. I probably have it in my auto suggestions. AWS Cloud Formation. I don't have it in autocorrect, but it should be something like delete stack. Let's try this SAM app. Oh, stack name, of course. So if you want to delete your resources, you can't do it with the SAM CLI. You can do it with the AWS CLI, or you can go in the console manually and just delete it. So you can come here to stacks, click on your stack, and just delete it, and it's going to delete all your resources. There may be a way to do it with SAM. The only thing I've read is that you can do it with SAM. If you know of a way to do it, let me know below. Otherwise, just run this command. This should work. Boom. Now it should be deleting. Yeah, delete in progress. Cool. So that's it. As always, if this video was helpful, consider hitting that thumbs up. I appreciate all of you watching, and I'll see you in the next video.